And welcome back to the WFMZ's TV studios. And tonight, you're seeing lawyers. You're seeing us here on the Law Journal television set. And as I said at the top of the show, 10 years ago, we were ready to do a show on free speech. And it turned out that Iraq attacked Israel that night. And we spoke for hours on our freedoms and our rights during wartime. And today, we were sitting down with 4 criminal trial attorneys to discuss various criminal programs or criminally related issues tonight. And we're here in the studio tonight, and obviously because of the tragedy in New York and in Washington and across the country today, we are discussing this with 4 attorneys. And a quick re-intro, I think, is in order. Phil Hours to my immediate left, a criminal defense attorney for many years now from the Easton, Pennsylvania area. Seated next to him is John Waldron with Huber and Waldron in Allentown, Pennsylvania, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor. Everett Gillison joins us tonight for the first time, a public defender from the city of Philadelphia. And also joining us is William Matz, an assistant district attorney, a prosecutor, if you will, from Northampton County. And we're continuing our discussion. And again, we will break away for any news that we need to do that, to serve you folks in the Greater Lehigh Valley, in Philadelphia, etc. We're also taking your phone calls tonight. 1-800-426-4625 is the number right here in the studio. A question right before we broke to listen to President Bush and his eloquent talk was dealt with this issue, and that is how, as a defense attorney, would you handle someone accused in a matter such as this? So let's just go down the line fairly quickly, and then we'll get back to your phone calls.
Well, I think defending somebody like this tests the whole system. You would defend this person as vigorously as you would defend anyone else, and if the system won't work for such a person, then it really is in danger of not working for anybody. It would be distasteful, obviously, but it would be a job, it would be a test for the system.
Assuming the individual or individuals made it to a courtroom, which I'm not sure with the climate right now.
What are you saying, there'd be lynched, John, before they get there?
I think that there'd be ultimate precautions on their safety would have to be in place. Because I think of the tenor now of the United States people. My perspective, I look at this as kind of a war situation. I don't know that I'd be interested in defending someone in a situation like this. I'd look at the evidence. I'd want to make sure that someone is being treated fairly, that they're not being all put in the same pot or something like that. But I truly look at this as a war situation, so I don't know that myself that I'd be interested in something
Good point.
Like this.
Everett, again, as a public defender, you're giving cases you don't want to take often.
Absolutely.
You must take them.
That's right, and I look upon being a public defender, it's a calling like no other, in the criminal law especially, because you don't have the right to say, I'm not going to do something. You can do that if you're in private practice. As a public defender, if the person came before me, I would do that. I would welcome the challenge to do the job. And the reason why public defenders can do the kind of work that we do is because we truly believe that the system says that there has to be 2 lawyers. There's 1 lawyer for the prosecutor, for the government that's there, and that person who's on the other side needs counsel that's going to stand up and do their best. That's all that the law requires, and that's what we would do. And I think that public defenders across our Commonwealth do this every day with distasteful cases that come into the courtroom, and we have to do our job, and we do it well. And I think that anyone that from the Public Defender Service that would be assigned this case, if they personally could not do the case, then believe me, there would still be someone there, someone like myself, who is a lifer, basically, who would say, yes, I'm coming forward, and I will make sure that this man gets what our country says that he should get, which is the fairest trial that he's supposed to get.
Cornerstone of our system. And again, even if it was a non-American we're talking about. And I'm sure that in the terrorist case that stemmed from the World Trade Center scenario 7, 8, 9 years ago, American public defenders had to be there.
One of the persons in there was a public defender. The others were court-appointed counsel who came forward as a result of the conspiracy kind of situations and volunteered their time as well.
Interesting. From the prosecutorial standpoint, Bill Matz, obviously if you're, and who knows what the evidence would certainly be in this kind of a case, but these are not slam dunk cases. In fact, prosecutors are in danger of overplaying their hand.
That's possible, certainly, but certainly you carry on your shoulders the community interests here, not necessarily particularly the interests of an individual coming before you, to emphasize the needs of the community in prosecuting it zealously as a way of deterrent, as a way of justice and correcting what has occurred.
Getting back to your telephone calls, again, folks, on this night of tragedy, we're talking about what has happened today, not just from a legal standpoint, but from a human emotional standpoint. So we're taking your phone calls. I know our lines are busy, so let's get to them. Marlene is up next. Marlene, good evening. You're on Law Journal.
Good evening. I've actually got two things here I'd like to bring up.
Quickly, please.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to know how they got these knives on a plane through security. Secondly, I think that we need to be a little more cautious about who we hire at these airline companies for maintenance and all the other departments. And I do know that money talks, so people do get phony papers. And I think something needs to be done in that area.
Okay, who would like to comment first?
What Marlene just said, I was speaking to my partner, Jim Hubert, today about going through the metal detectors, metal's detected and you get searched and things. I don't know about your luggage, which you hand off and gets delivered to the plane. And the folks that deal with the luggage, in a situation, if these are terrorists, they could have worked there 2 or 3 years. They could have been trusted employees, and then, as insiders, had access to leave knives or guns or whatever weapons were used in this. So I agree with Marlene. I think from the ground up, there has to be scrutiny. Luggage handlers,
But don't you? But it's funny that you or I, if we were to bring a cap gun on a plane, we're going to probably get caught. Don't you think months, maybe years, were planned to get very sophisticated plastic explosives or what have you? Sometimes, and I understand the ire of some of the people calling tonight in the American public saying we need more security at airports, we need better systems of gathering information. But can you get every single bit, every weapon, every plastic explosive? Can you screen all of those out? Do you know every conversation that is going down around this world? And yes, maybe we do need better security. Orrin Hatch was saying that today. John was saying that earlier. We need to spend some more money. But at the same time, we thwarted the last World Trade Center bombing. We thwarted the prospective bombing in Los Angeles just a few months ago. Again, that's page 10 news. If that bomb goes off in LAX, it's all of this. So maybe we're not giving our security and our efforts of security in this nation the kind of due that we really should be doing tonight. The fact that this hasn't happened earlier, I think, is a miracle of sorts. Phil.
Well, I was just about to say that I think the fact that we're a country where we enjoy the kind of freedoms we do makes it almost inevitable that if somebody really wants to work their way through the security systems, they'll be able to do it. And I believe that John's right. I think, however, we have to relook at all of the airport security arrangements from the bottom up and figure out a way that this can be accomplished and at the same time not bring the airline industry to a halt.
We have one caller who is responding to what Attorney Gillison said earlier in the program. Chuck from Downingtown is up next. Chuck, go ahead.
Good evening, Christopher.
How are you?
Good. Yes, I did want to agree with Mr. Gillison, and I also wanted to say that certainly the president was no Franklin Delano Roosevelt with his speech, but I do agree with Mr. Gillison in terms of the fact that we do need to get a more global perspective on exactly what's happening here. I mean, this is not just a national problem now. It is an international, or has been an international problem, and now it has become this country's problem. And I think that there has to be greater concern among the people of this nation as to how we are going to collectively, as a global community, effectively deal with this issue.
It's interesting too, because a lot of people, when you talk about globalization, and we think about certain financial globalization efforts and legal globalization efforts, there's fear because we do want to have hegemony. We want to, be lords of our own country, if you will, and yet. maybe international courts are not that far away. I know we have them in The Hague. I know that we have them internationally. But what kind of teeth do they actually have? Not much of anything, as John Waldron is shaking his head, saying it just doesn't happen.
I don't know. I don't know whether I agree.
Thank you, Chuck, for your phone call.
I don't know if I agree necessarily with John right now. Right now, you have at The Hague going on. They have the I think it's Milosevic who is sitting in the dock waiting to be tried on crimes against humanity, and that is something that is not getting much play here. And that's one of the things that I sometimes worry about, that we don't seem to understand or make the connection to, when Yugoslavia was going to pot and people were getting massed murdered and whatever, it really, until we decided to really get involved and to send our kids over there to help those people stop, we didn't care.
What about the 2.5 million people dying in the Congo in the last
That's
year
right.
and a half?
We don't care.
Right.
And those people look at our excess, and they look at how we live, and they say it's all excessive given their standard of living, and that anger sometimes and the lack of appreciation for where they are fuels that anger. And I think that the more that we as American citizens are able to understand that we are part and parcel of this global economy, not just as business people to be used and abused, but as persons that are involved, that are fellow human beings on the planet, I think we can make an impact and stop some of this kind of anger that is always thrown towards us.
We've got Ed up next, and Ed's got a question that deals actually with search and seizure issues and what happened today. So Ed, go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, my question is to Phil Lauer. With relation to DUI checkpoints, the government answered a problem with drunken drivers and allowed checkpoints. But now they also go on to check for registration and other amenities. And I was wondering if there's anything we need to look out for as a result of today's events.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to keep singing the same song, and I've been singing it since the top of the show. In my view, there's a lot that could be done to tighten security enough. Tighten security. Whether it would ever be enough is another issue. And I believe that as security gets tightened, your liberties have to disappear to some extent. I have to say that I just wanted to comment on something that Everett was talking about earlier. I think that this country, as a result of the Cold War or whatever, got tired of looking at and dealing with international problems. And we have to go back there. We have to go back there.
All right. Any other comments here on the panel regarding that?
I don't
John?
think the international court has much teeth. I think the United States court system as a justice system has more teeth throughout the years than an international court system. I truly believe that, just from my experience, whether it's Noriega or other individuals, war criminals, Nazi war criminals that have been brought back. I truly think the American system is the best system, but I also think it has quite a bit more teeth than the international court system.
And again, so we do have, to make it clear, we do have federal statutes which deal with terrorism. Obviously, that's what we utilized in the last terrorist Osama bin Laden related case. Again, I don't know if it was ever proved that these terrorists were tied back to these people, these so-called terrorists, Osama bin Laden's camp in the Mideast. But it's not important. They were just simply, again, they were prosecuted successfully because of the crimes they were committed. I'm sure our intelligence agencies made sure to find out as best they possibly could who they were indeed tied to. Thanks for your telephone call. Let's go to our next caller, Kelly. Who's up next? Chad is up next. Go ahead, Chad. What's on your mind?
Oh, yeah. If we attack again, are we prepared for these people to attack again?
Are we prepared if this happens again? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Let's hope that, let's at least hope that, obviously we're in a heightened state of fear and awareness here. Probably, if anything, we are over-anxious, if anything, today. Let's put it this way. Let's hope that the worst is over. Let's hope, it's possible. We could certainly find another bomb laying around somewhere from all of this today, although you would think that this was as grand a finale as one, or at least opening. Let's hope it's a finale, but as big a display as one group could muster in a single day. Thanks for your telephone call. Let's go to Kelly, who's on the line next. Harvey is up next. Harvey, welcome to Law Journal. Good evening.
Two things. There are procedures that pilots are supposed to follow in the event of it, and some of
Who's
the
supposed to?
things-
I'm sorry, Harvey. Who's supposed to follow?
Pilot.
The pilots.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, there's certain things that they can do to let the control tower know, and the cockpits are supposed to be locked. But there was concern by some of the pilots,
I know it's only conjecture, and we're all citizens here, but then what do you think happened today? I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what happened, why the towers weren't notified, why the towers weren't in touch with the pilot of this plane when this thing takes a 90-degree dogleg south going to Boston, and it's supposed to be on its way to L.A.
well, obviously there were the pilots that took over the plane knew those procedures.
In other words, you believe that perhaps, and again, it's all conjecture, folks. Tonight's the night to do it, though. That you believe that they talked to the tower and were explaining why they were heading south? See, again, in my mind, my logical mind can't put this together. Again, I don't know the technology. I don't know how the FAA works. It'd be interesting, and if we had time tonight, it might be good to get someone from the FAA or an airline pilot to join us today.
Yeah, maybe a pilot could call in, actually, and
Yes.
give us some insight
Yes.
in that regard. I don't know who, I mean, we don't know who was flying this.
Okay.
Was it the hijackers? Was it a pilot? And what do you do as a pilot?
Yeah, when they-
Let's say you're on a suicide mission and you have these unfortunate passengers with you, and they want to direct you to the Trade Center in New York. Do you fly that mission? Do you try and ditch the plane in some safer area?
Well, apparently, is that what
I don't-
happened today? No.
The inference I heard from
ahead,
at
Bill.
least the crash that occurred in
Western
Pentagon was that the pilots were taken from the cockpit and replaced by the individuals who had gotten on the plane to do what they did. So that it may not necessarily be the pilots who can be giving the warnings in light of some certain circumstances that occur here. And I'm not so sure in the previous question that even if you knew that there was a hijacking, what would be the response? I think the preparedness of this country to that sort of act doesn't exist that I know of, that you'd suddenly have flights of F-16s and F-15s that intercept a plane and divert it from a potential disaster like we saw today. I think that would be...
Well, and I think, we don't think of a hijacker taking the plane and crashing it through a building. We think of him taking it to another country. Although, again, certainly that policy is going to change, has already changed, I'm sure. Again, I'm just curious, and I think hopefully we'll find out tomorrow why we did not know earlier that terrorists were on that plane, or even that it was hijacked. Now, I heard earlier today, again, citizens of the United States, we're just chatting tonight, and the information we've heard from our national news sources, and that is that and we had a caller who wanted to address this, and unfortunately we lost that caller earlier, that the pilot on this plane, apparently the one that crashed in western Pennsylvania, was a hero of sorts. I mean, who knows? Have you gentlemen heard anything about that? Can you comment? I mean, again, I know it's hearsay, if I dare say, on this show, but have you heard anything about that? John, you're shaking your head yes.
I heard, and once again, it's conjecture that pilot ditched that plane. And I heard at one point they were going to Camp David, and then I heard there was concerns that they might be heading towards Chicago, to Sears Tower. So I've heard both of those, but he ditched it, I think, 80 or 85 miles from Pittsburgh, and once again, that's
in a rather rural area, as well.
Right?
So
perhaps we'll be able to perhaps in the days to come we'll find out more, find out what the cockpit recorder has recorded,
right,
and determine if indeed terrorists went in there and then perhaps just crashed the plane, or there was a problem, or indeed, as we have been hearing, that pilot was a hero today.
For your callers, I think one of the things that you should understand is that that's in Pennsylvania, and as a result, there is going to be a homicide investigation. It's going to be a result of it's not just going to be a federal investigation. It'll also be a state investigation. There will be, the black boxes are going to be the property of the FAA to find out what was going on. We have heard that there was someone in a bathroom that had alerted to the hijacking that was going on in that plane, and then it went dead, and they're going to try and match that to when the plane actually went down. So I think that for Pennsylvanians, one of the reasons why you wanted to have that area secured very quickly by not only the feds but also the state officials, is because there are going to be people who are going to have to reconstruct what happened here, and to be able to tell us as Pennsylvanians, to give us the best guess as to what was going on in that plane. And of all the sites, they said that plane and that flight recorder may be the one that survived.
Actually,
because
I
it's the
heard
one
today
that is built for that kind of crash. And maybe we'll find out what was going on in that flight recorder.
There was an interview today with the former director of the National Transportation Safety Board who said that plane's black box is likely to be recovered, whereas the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center may not be because of the incredible confusion and damage.
We've got a caller on the line, Louisa, who has a comment about President Bush's remarks tonight. Go ahead, Louisa. You're on Law Journal.
I feel that the president made it very clear that we did not fall, but we united, and that in itself should be a warning to anyone. I also feel that his speech, being short, however it was very concise, and that he did a very good job at it, considering the fact that he is under great pressure to get a lot done in a short amount of time.
Thank you for your commentary, Louisa, and I think that there are probably a lot of Americans who are feeling also sharing those sentiments tonight as we sit here. And yes, as we as Americans come together, I always wonder, the Japanese were very much afraid of waking a sleeping giant. I don't know if it was Tojo or it was one of their great military leaders. And this nation has been, many people talk about a moral decline and we've become soft and too much MTV, et cetera, et cetera. But you shake and rattle the cage of this country and just watch our spirit come alive. And I don't care if you'd voted for George Bush or not. There are many people who are very proud of the president. Maybe they felt that he was not, as one caller said, he was not Roosevelt-esque, but he did speak for all Americans tonight. Absolutely. And I think that all of us are shoulder to shoulder. We're behind that wheel tonight. And the message is pretty clear. You don't want to mess with us. You really don't want to mess with the spirit of the American people.
There was a quote earlier from Bill Clinton to the effect that now was not the time for second guessing, and we all needed to be behind the president. And I think we all are. Yeah,
good point. Good point. All right, let's get back to your telephone calls. Kelly, who's up tonight? Cliff is up next. Cliff, good evening. You're on Law Journal.
How do you do?
Good.
Just wondering, what are the articles which Congress can call a war? Because this is an act of war. I mean, somebody comes in and smashes into our buildings and destroys a city and our Pentagon, which is and that's a bastion of our military. And if we do not know who did this, how are we ever going to become a nation that is going to be able to stand up and say, listen, we're going to crush whoever did this?
Well, that you bring up a good point, Cliff, and here's the interesting evolution of war, isn't it? That there used to be a time where brightly colored, red-suited soldiers stood across a field from brightly colored, blue-colored soldiers, and they would raise their muskets at one another and fire away. We've come a long way since then, haven't we? You can have a 15-ton hammer, but if you're going after a mosquito or a gnat, it proves an elusive target. Yes, John Waldron said it very eloquently. It is an act of war. It is a criminal act of war. The only question is, who is the enemy and where is he or she? Thanks for your call, though. Let's go ahead to Crystal next. Crystal is up next on our special edition of Law Journal tonight. Good evening, Crystal. Is Crystal there?
Hi, I'm here.
Go ahead. What's your question?
I was just wondering if, how you feel about the bombing in Afghanistan, and if you think it was a country that was affiliated with the United States.
And say that last part again, Crystal.
If you think it was affiliated with
do we
the
think,
United
in other
States.
words, do we think that the United States actually, we were the ones that launched those bombs tonight? Is that what you're asking?
Or like a country that's like kind of sided with us.
I see. Go ahead, John.
And this is pure speculation, Crystal. When I watched that bombing on the news, there wasn't much. The newscasters didn't say much because they weren't sure what happened. Was it retaliation for what occurred today? Was it a pretext that Afghanistan is making it look like they're getting bombed when they were the ones that perpetrated this? There's, you can pick quite a few reasons as to why this might have happened in Afghanistan. I don't know who was injured there. I don't know where this bombing took place. But it runs the gamut from retaliation to them setting up a pretext, making it look like there's retaliation.
You don't want to forget either that they're in the middle of their own civil strife. So, I mean, that's certainly a possibility as well.
Crystal, thank you for your telephone call. You know, it's interesting because we did. Who said it earlier that we did indeed help Afghanistan in their Russian war, the War of the Soviet Union in 1984, and then also I think we helped Afghanistan because I think a lot of the refugees from Iraq, with Saddam Hussein, actually escaped to Afghanistan. So in some ways, we did help that country.
I just had a question actually to the callers, Chris. I wonder, should these folks be arrested, and if they're outside of the United States, brought to the United States, how do the callers feel about being a potential juror in a case like this? I mean, this is one of the greatest American tragedies of all time, and I wonder about that. Could you get a fair jury? I mean, everyone knows about this. We're talking about it. And I just wonder, from the caller's perspective, is there anyone that wouldn't be biased?
That's good.
Where do you bring these jurors from another country? I mean, you know, I'm being facetious.
Thank you, John. But I like the fact that you're asking questions of our audience. And so go ahead. We'll answer John's question. Could you sit on a jury that was trying one of these terrorists? Again, 1-800-426-4625 is the number right here in the studio. Kelly, go ahead. Ruth is next. We'll just continue with our phone calls. We're going to be here till probably about 10 p.m. tonight, so we'll continue to take your phone calls. If you get that busy signal, continue to try calling in. And again, tonight, folks, we're normally not even on Tuesday nights. This is Law Journal. We're normally seen Monday nights at 7 p.m., but tonight we were going to tape some shows, and my criminal trial attorneys have been good enough to field your questions. So go ahead, Ruth, you're up next. What is on your mind tonight?
When the president made his address speech tonight,
yes,
he mentioned about bringing the people to justice. He didn't even mention a course of action to protect us Americans right now. Even in the past, we haven't really been protected. I feel very insecure in my home.
Mm-hmm. You're not the only one, I'm sure, tonight. I don't know what the president could have said.
Well, I think until the president knows who it is he's up against, where they are, and how many of them there are, I mean, I don't know that the president it would be irresponsible for him, I think, to be laying out a plan of action at this point.
And I think that relative to the president, I think there's a plan of action that's taking place, or was taking place all day today, but I think it's confidential. I think that what the president's doing, he can't reveal to us as citizens because of national security. So I think you should feel safe at home, because I think everything that he can do, he's doing, along with all our the Army, Navy, Air Force, etc. I just don't think he can give us in black and white what his plan is.
What I'd like to speak to the caller is to say to her, always remember one thing. If you let the terrorists take that sense of security from you, you've let the terrorists win. And you don't want to ever do that. We can be shocked and we can endure the pain, and collectively we're going to get through this. You should be taking steps at this point to be able to get involved with the response. And I think that you'll find yourself becoming a lot more secure. You know, even if you did something as minimal as saying there is an immense need for blood right now,
Amen.
Give blood. Go out and rally. One of the things that we learned from World War II is that when the community comes together and all facets of the community acts as one, we become a stronger country. And that's the best way to counteract terrorism. Don't let them take your sense of security from you at all. That's what we have to deal with.
It's a good point. I mean, obviously, our legal program doesn't often wade into the areas of psychological or spiritual imperatives. But, the question could be asked is, where do we find our safety? There are always going to be terrorists. Can you? None of us, of course, were alive during the Second World War. But could you imagine after Pearl Harbor? You weren't around to express much of an opinion then, Phil. But always leave it to Phil Lauer to come up with a colorful answer. But the point being that imagine with the Nazis on the march, having taken over almost all of Europe at that point in time, the specter of the Japanese, we had little or no defense in this country. I hail or live in Virginia a portion of the year, and they have stories about what took place on that coast in the summer of 1942. Imagine no defenses and seeing night after night after night of cargo ships literally being blown up on the horizon, 5 miles off the coast of the Carolinas or Virginia. Imagine the terror, imagine the fear. So ultimately, and again, I'm not here to proselytize, but perhaps the question ultimately is, where do you find your safety? How do you deal with fear? How do you escape that fear? How do you deal with it? In fact, I think we've got a caller on the line. Kelly, my producer, said that Emma is her name, that I think addresses this in some way. Go ahead, Emma. Go right ahead.
Hi. I don't know much about the government, but I do know the Lord. And I know the Lord can take us through all kinds of things. And the president is a man that has a lot of things to deal with. So just like he said in the 23rd song, the devil is real powerful, but the God is stronger than the devil. So we should pray for the people under that rubbish and hope that they have another life in them tomorrow. That's all we can do.
Yeah, thanks for reminding us, too. There are people who may very well be alive under that rubble. I mean, there's so many facets to what's happened today. Our minds are going to try to, and our souls perhaps, assimilating this information for months to come. But that's, even if you even if you don't believe in prayer, maybe you believe in what quantum physicists are saying these days, that even if you send a thought to something, it has an impact on that person, that thing, that event, what have you. So, although again, this is let's not mince words. This has always been. The time of Franklin Roosevelt is today a religious nation, dare I say, a spiritual nation, and Franklin Roosevelt invoked the name of the deity. And I thought President Bush tonight, in a tempered way, not in a zealous way, evoked, if you will, spirit when he alluded to a prayer that any of us, or most of us in this predominantly Judeo-Christian society, are aware of, the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. And I think even an agnostic or an atheist can even find some solace in that. Thank you for your telephone call, Emma. Gentlemen, I don't know if we have any comments, so we have more phone calls that we can go ahead and take. So why don't we get to our next phone call? Kelly, Marcy is up next tonight. Marcy, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Chris. I wanted to address the issue that Mr. Waldron brought up regarding the perpetrators of this act receiving a fair trial. First of all, I did want to say that I certainly would not shed any tears if the perpetrators somehow met their demise in our efforts to arrest them. However, I certainly agree that it would be difficult to find an unbiased jury. And I am of the opinion that we certainly have the war crime tribunals, and possibly with the amount of terrorism that goes on, not only in this country, but in all countries throughout this world, that it may be time to set up a terrorist tribunal where all terrorists are tried literally by a panel of judges and are judged on their acts that were committed within whatever countries. And I don't know how others feel about that, but I really don't think it would be possible within this country for such a heinous act to find a jury of 12 unbiased individuals.
Bill Matz, let me toss that one to you.
Well, I think she's right at this point. I think John's comment's well taken, that that would be difficult. Certainly, though, I don't think you can enter as a juror or experience decision-making without some influence of your past or your experience and the things and circumstances around you. So you'd have to draw to your inner self to be impartial in the decision-making despite the circumstances, and listen to the facts and make decisions based on those facts the best you can. I think it's naive to think that emotion and other things are not part of any part of decision-making. So, although certainly this adds a lot more of that than you normally find in the average case, I still believe that the American people could try to put that aside in a way which would make sense to the overall interests of justice.
Go ahead, Everett.
I actually would agree with Bill, because if you just remember, we just had the World Trade bombing trial. And while what happens is that time, sometimes getting a distance between the event and the actual trial, and then taking the time to put on and to cull from a various numbers of people, they were able to get a jury that did listen to the facts, that did listen to all of the evidence, and was able to not only get a fair trial from what I could see and the reports that we were getting, but even where death was the death penalty was in play in that case, the jury actually spared the lives of those men there in a way that meant to me that here an American jury actually was able to put that kind of passion aside and look at the case for what it was and decided it fairly. And I think that spoke volumes about the power of our system as opposed to other systems around the world. And I think that's where we get our strength.
Thanks for your... go ahead. Is that Bill or is that Phil going next? Phil. Go ahead, Phil.
I was about to say that I think it would be a case where, and I've had a couple where you honestly believe that the only fair juror would be somebody who's been asleep for the last 10 years. But I think in this case, as in any extremely difficult case, we could do it. The jury system in this country would be able to deal with it. I believe it works, and it would work then.
Thank you for your telephone call. Let's go to Terry in Easton next. Go ahead, Terry.
Hi. I don't really have a question. I just kind of have...
That's all right. We're open to comments as well tonight.
Well, I have a comment about the psychological ramifications of this. I mean, everybody keeps comparing this to Pearl Harbor, but in Pearl Harbor, it was a known enemy. We knew it was the Japanese. In this instance, I mean, you can point your finger anywhere, but we have no clue where this is coming from, and we're fighting an unknown enemy. And
Terry, let me ask you a question. Do you really think we have no clue, or do you think perhaps we don't have a clue as to where he or she is?
I don't think that it's the American public that doesn't know, and I think that's where a lot of the numbness is coming from and what people are feeling. I mean, like I said, you can point your finger anywhere, but we just don't really know. I mean, maybe the government knows, but I don't think they're not at liberty at this point.
Let's put it this way. I think if we could have tracked bin Laden down before, regardless of what happened today, he would be probably an executed man. No way, question about that. We went after Noriega. We knew what we needed to do there. We brought him back. We brought him to justice, that sort of thing. We simply cannot find bin Laden if indeed he is the one who is ultimately responsible. That seems to be the best guesses now. But again, we are all conjecturing. The United States has not come out. No government official has come out and said we are 90% certain that this is the man, although William Cohen, former defense secretary, more or less said that tonight on CNN.
But I think I agree that it seems it's more insidious when we can't say this is the country that did it or this is the person that did it. I think it makes it a little more difficult to comprehend. It makes people a little more easy when you can't point the finger and say, let's go get them. That's the way we kind of think at times. And so basically now we're speculating, but we can't necessarily go and bomb this place or arrest this person, or with bin Laden, we've been looking for him for a long time. We miss him by 2 hours or 2 days, and he's moving around, and I mean that's just been unfortunate.
Individuals made decisions. Individuals were involved in actions, and in that sense, it's not something which is like the air out there. There are people who were involved and who did that. In this sense, once the investigation gets where it needs to get, and certainly zealously to that point, there will be direction to the need to find justice.
I think you get to a place here in this discussion where I think you have to begin differentiating between an act of war and a horrible crime. An act of war deserves a national response. This deserves a national response, but in actuality, unless this is carefully orchestrated by some other country, and I can't imagine a country who wanted to attack us couldn't find a few planes of their own instead of having to hijack ours. So it seems to me it's a terrorist act, and it ought to be dealt with in that way.
And of course, it's been in the last 50 or 60 years that we've even gotten court systems involved, or let's say the legal process involved with wars, which is kind of the interesting, the blurring of war. It used to be a time against soldiers fought against soldiers, and now we've had guerrilla warfare, and we've had women and children and citizens involved. And in about 50 or 60 years, again, this continual blurring, where before we never would have thought of a court of law or any kind of legal process, making judgments after war. But just look at what happened in Nuremberg in 1945. I mean, that is, you can point to that on the map, the chronological map, as the first major tribunal, legal tribunal, to try quote-unquote war criminals. So in some ways, Phil Lauer's right. It's an and-both situation. It is an act of war. It does deserve a warlike response, and yet at the same time, I don't think we're going to get away without getting some sort of court or legal process involved.
And it's interesting to speculate as to how this might be different if there were a really more active and more readily accepted and understood by this country international tribunal. Maybe the rest of the world would be participating in the investigation, the prosecution, and so forth. We've kind of hung ourselves out to dry in that area to some extent by not cooperating fully with the international tribunals.
Good point. Prosecutor Bill Matz, go ahead.
Well, I was just noting that at least if we compare it to Nuremberg, what we're comparing, though, is to a tribunal that occurred after the war, after the actions had been completed, after the reactions and the response was complete. A little different than dealing with just a civil approach to the fact that there may be a crime, we investigate and we proceed to a trial to try to resolve the interests of justice. Hard to compare that from war itself or the response to war. I think if we call it an act of war, as John has described it and others have described it, which I think is exactly what has happened today, while we're in that state, the response is not necessarily gauged and judged by civil issues that we're used to in everyday life.
We're going to be here for about another 10 minutes or so, folks, and then I understand we will be going back to CNN, so we'll be trying to take as many phone calls as we can over the next 10 minutes. Let's get to our next phone call. Rick is up next. Rick, welcome to Law Journal.
Good evening. I'm just
Rick is
calling.
an attorney, I think, from Souderton, from what I... Oh, no, that's the next one. Sorry, go ahead, Rick.
Well, thank you for the raise. I was just calling about the fair trial.
Yes.
The persons who committed these acts today are just lucky enough to have committed them in a country where we're concerned with that fact. Should they be some of bin Laden's men in their own country, they would not get the benefit of a fair trial.
No, consider 12 Christians who are not even proselytizing but discussing Christianity with Muslims, and it's let's string them up first and then we'll give them a trial.
Correct.
So that's the Taliban, and again, that's why our forefathers, as much as they may have been spiritually oriented men, said we're not going to have a government, a one religion government. We're not going to have a religious government whatsoever.
So, Rick, do you think that they should not get a fair trial, or could not, or where?
So their acts merit a fair trial.
Here, I think what he's saying is, in this country, they have attacked a country which would afford them a fair trial, as opposed to if Phil Lauer or Everett Gillison went over to Afghanistan and even mentioned it or suggested it, they would be dead on the spot. But again, perhaps that's what does set us apart. Maybe that's why, as we've heard many people say, and it sounds so self-serving, but most Americans, no matter how disgruntled we may be with our government, we do believe we live in the best country in the world. Everett said it much more eloquently than I earlier in this program, and that is because we can't express ourselves. It's because trial attorneys like Phil Lauer and Everett Gillison and John Waldron are out. They every day, day in and day out, they are defending those people who are criminally accused. We know that some of those men end up and women end up being guilty, and yet it's because of those very rights that we hold ourselves up, perhaps a little higher than whatever that midpoint may be in the world. Certainly higher than you would find, sadly, in a Mideastern country such as Afghanistan. Thank you for your phone call, Rick. Who is our attorney? Glenn is up next. Glenn is the attorney from Souderton. Glenn, welcome to Law Journal. Glenn, are you with us? I guess we lost our attorney, didn't we? John Waldron's going to make a comment in a moment.
I just wanted to throw something out about the, how in all societies there's different, we treat our children differently or discipline our children differently in certain societies or get along with our wife differently in different societies. What I wanted to throw out is this. What about the mindset of these terrorists? Are they brainwashed? Is it a religious thing? I just wonder, and it's a better question, I guess, for a psychiatrist or a psychologist or some of the listeners. How do you convince someone to perform these acts knowing that you're going to lose your own life? Is there a greater good? Do they believe in reincarnation, that by doing something like this you come back at a higher level? As Gavin, an attorney in my office, had mentioned. I just throw that out because it's that mindset is what allows them to perform these terrorist acts.
But again, as Americans in the Second World War, weren't we absolutely astonished, beyond incredulous, when kamikazes would take their plane and slam them into the sides of our battleships or aircraft carriers?
And we were, and I wonder, not that there's an explanation, but is it brainwashing? What is the thought process?
Well, I think in part, I mean, it's a religious idea that should you perish in this kind of struggle, that you are destined for a better place. And I mean, that's well understood, and I think it's difficult to fight with religion.
There's an interesting point. Frankly, I didn't want to bring it up tonight, but it is a specter we may be faced with. And again, we lawyers sometimes take it on the chin. But we have a caller on the line who has a question, and her name is Race from Easton. And go ahead, Race. Why don't you pose it better than I could?
Well, I'm a he.
Sorry. Well,
that's okay.
I wasn't sure at first.
The
It's
show
an
was a nice
intriguing
gesture.
name.
Two questions. Are there lawsuits that will take place if there's because of mistakes being made in an incident like this from the people that are involved? And how will the people who have lost ones involved have a say in the outcome of what decisions are made?
That's interesting point. Obviously, the first question is civilly related. And you know what? We may as well take it. We've only got a few minutes left. We may as well take that question straight on. We know that in the aftermath of tragedy, maybe not 5 days later or a week later or a month later, but sometimes months down the line, we realize that someone says, hey, somebody was negligent here. The World Trade Center could have had a better security system, or the United States government didn't do what they were supposed to do, or what have you. Do you think we're going to see lawsuits? Let's be honest about it.
I think we will, and I think it's too easy to denigrate that process. I think that's an important part of this system. I think it has saved this country and its citizens injury. It has saved millions and billions of dollars. I firmly believe that those kind of lawsuits keep everybody perked up. So I, for one, think they will probably be there. I think there's a benefit to it, but I think at the moment it's the wrong time to think about it. Anybody talking about money now it just doesn't look and feel like the kind of person we want to have. But I think they're coming, and maybe it's a good idea.
Anyone else with a comment on the panel tonight?
Just one. Under the federal statutes, and I agree with Phil about the timing of it, but there is civil lawsuits that can be brought against the perpetrators. You can collect treble damages, which is 3 times your own damages. I don't know how you collect that.
They're sponsoring country.
Right,
as well.
if they sponsored it, and you can prove that they do, ultimately, you can collect that kind of money, but at this point in time, it's just too premature.
All right, let's go to Kay. We've got just a few minutes left. Kay, go ahead with your question.
Yes, my question is first of all, I think we're talking now about dealing with an irrational person on a rational basis. When we talk about trying to get in their minds, we haven't got a clue what they...
Hey, Kay, Kay, we've got some problems with your telephone. Could you speak up just a little bit?
As loud as I can.
And turn down your TV if it's close.
I have it turned down.
All right.
My comment is that we're in discussing trials and hearings and so forth.
Yes.
We're talking about dealing with irrational people on a rational basis. You can't do it. There's no bargaining with them. And my concern, I'm in my 60s and have grandchildren. My concern is if somebody doesn't handle things swiftly and with a forcible, quick track, where are our children going to be? Right,
but no, we're not talking about, I don't think anyone's talking about cutting a deal here. Lawyers sometimes do plea bargain, but no one's talking about any kind of bargain or cutting a deal here. Phil.
Well, I was just going to say, we're talking about the legal ramifications of it, but I don't think there's anybody on this set that wouldn't like to see the perpetrators strung up quickly, accurately, and be done with it. Unfortunately, we're looking down the road to see what might happen if in fact they're caught and tried and all that sort of thing. But I think everybody agrees, Kay, that some sort of response is appropriate, and we hope it comes quickly.
You know, go ahead, Bill.
We also understand a little bit about what's happening in the sense that it's strictly geared toward terror toward an end which takes some recognition toward the individual's direction of what they want. I mean, terror is what it's all about. Fear that would lead us to probably a direction which may help their ends, and whether it's a religious end or a financial end, and it goes back to some of the global questions that were raised earlier, I think.
You know, we literally have about 20 seconds for each of you or so, maybe 30 seconds. And let's end on this note, more or less, and that is, how are the events of today going to impact our legal rights, the way you gentlemen practice? What do we see happening? Phil Lauer.
I'm hoping they don't affect it at all. The system works. The system will deal with these heinous acts the way it has dealt with many others. And I just hope that we don't allow ourselves to let, as Everett said earlier, let the terrorists win. We have a system. It'll work. It'll protect us. It'll mete out justice. It'll work.
John Waldron.
The system is elastic. It stretches, and I hope that it doesn't necessarily, as a result of this, that immediate decisions are made and we go from one extreme to another because of this heinous tragedy. I'm hoping we still stay elastic and we still take each case on its own merits rather than generalizing.
Everett Gillison, our public defender on tonight's show.
I would just ask that everyone remember that, and I echo what John just said, that you have to remember one thing and one thing only. We are stronger than anything that has ever been put towards us as Americans. And we can get through this, but we can only get through this if we end up having faith in our systems. And that's what we have to have.
Bill Matz, we've got about 20 seconds for you. Go ahead.
And I believe, as all they have said too, that we're resilient, that we'll join together, we'll find a unified answer to the dilemma that we face today, and we'll come up on top.
All right, gentlemen, Bill Matz, thank you, our prosecutor. And again, Phil, John, and Everett, we're looking forward to having a program where we're going to discuss just straight ahead criminal issues. For all of us here at Law Journal, thank you for joining us tonight. Join us every Monday night right here on WFMZ TV at 7 p.m. We're going to go to a quick commercial break, and then we'll be back with CNN to continue following the matters of this day, this tragic day in American history. Good night now.